we've seen with this current coalition,
Yeah.
that in the end, the manifesto is barely worth the paper it's written on. Look at what your party's had to do on tuition fees.
Well, I'm certainly not taking lectures from John Prescott on tuition fees, since Labour absolutely vote fast
Delivered on promises.
on their own
Judges
manifesto, got a majority government, and then did exactly the opposite of what they said they would do. So he's no
Well, rather than
position to
taking
throw
lectures
stones.
from John Prescott, answer my question.
Right.
That'd be a good idea.
Inevitably, you've got to accept that if no one party can speak for the outright majority of the country, then it can't, by definition, get all its own way on everything it wants to do.
It undermines trust at a time when trust in politicians is very low. Everything you promise us, if it becomes a coalition government, you just say, oh, well, I know I promised that, but I can't do it.
No, I think you've got to look at this, take this coalition, the one we've got, the only practical example in Britain in terms of UK governance. What you've got is an economic policy which has brought, in the main, the two parties of coalition together. Now, there's big arguments about how deep and how fast you cut public expenditure and so on and so forth.
You promised it wouldn't be deep.
But the general direction is an agreed direction. And within that, you can point to specific policies. I can point to the raising of tax thresholds, very much a Lib Dem policy, not a George Osborne policy.
Sure,
That's
I know what you've got and what you haven't got,
on.
but even your own Norman Baker, a leading Lib Dem, said in a coalition situation, it's unrealistic to expect people to be held to their manifesto. Well, if you can't be held to it, I'm not sure what's the point of publishing it or people like me having to read it.
Well,
Andrew, can I just say, we can debate the coalition, and this is where Charles and I would probably
stick to
disagree,
the
but
issue
fact
that
exactly,
it undermines
AV,
trust.
No, let me just say that an introduction of AV as our voting system would not give rise to coalition governments contrary to the view that's being propagated. So it's not more likely. It is not more likely. It is not more likely under AV. Majority governments are just as possible under AV as they are.
But you accept there will be more Lib Dems under an AV system?
Not necessarily.
The studies you've quoted show that.
Yeah, they say
not necessarily.
Why do you want to see Nick Clegg as the perpetual kingmaker of the United Kingdom?
Because he won't be. And if people in these elections want to punish Nick Clegg for breaking his promises, then vote against him in the local elections. But this is something bigger. And for once, we've got to talk to the voters of this country.
Well,
this is being offered as
today.
a better
But do you
system
believe in
for the
coalitions?
voters.
Do you believe in coalitions, Tassie?
I believe in giving people the opportunity to vote in a way that makes their vote count.
But do coalitions provide stronger than weaker government?
If you find that the people of this country deliver a coalition, then the parties who are in a position to form a coalition have to do so in the national interest. We're the servants
looking
here,
at the
not the
democratic
masters.
world, Charles Kennedy.
yes.
First past the post is used in elections covering almost 2.5 billion people. I'll say that again, 2.5 billion people in 50 countries around the world. Only Papua New Guinea, Fiji and Australia use AV. Could you tell us what Papua New Guinea, and by the way, Fiji is now a military dictatorship, could you tell us what Papua New Guinea has to teach the mother of parliaments?
Well, I don't come from the starting point that we are the mother of parliaments and nowhere else in the world can we learn from other people's experiences.
But only three. So you think that the experience of Papua New Guinea and Fiji and Australia should take precedence over the other 50 countries that use our existing system?
At the risk of sounding a bit like a Michael Howard Eurosceptic, I think in Britain we should take our own decisions about how we choose to govern ourselves.
Smiling.
How we choose. Actually, I've been listening all these years, Michael. And in so
you've just got a contract, Michael Howard.
We all welcome sinners who repent.
Yeah, no, well, and in so doing, where we are in British politics is we've got an ossified, out-of-date, corrupting form of elections called first past the post, and we've got an option for a degree of moderate reform of it.
All right.
Can I just say, I think we're in danger of being a little unfair to the people of Papua New Guinea, and I'll spring to their defence, because they've abandoned AV, and they're going to have their next election under a different system again. And in Australia, which is the only other country, you've said Fiji now has a military dictatorship, in Australia 6 out of 10 people in an opinion poll which was recently carried out want to get rid of AV.
Okay, though you and I recently
what
met
the
the
difference is.
former
But
Prime
don't
Minister of
forget-
Australia.
But Michael, you know perfectly well there is no
Australia's a very
proposal to
important
get rid
lesson.
of
And why
AV.
did coalitions come about? Because the National Party and the Liberal Party were split as two right-wing parties, and Labour used to come and get it. They got together, and Labour hasn't had power before until it's just come in recently at the behest of two farmers who negotiated a good deal.
All right, I'm impressed by the panel's knowledge of Papua New Guinea and Australian politics. But let me bring you back to Britain, John Prescott. When Tony Blair put you in charge of the Cabinet Committee on voting systems, Charles Kennedy said it was, quote, like putting King Herod in charge of a maternity ward, which is an interesting idea. I mean, the truth is that you would have been against any change.
No, it's not true, Andrew. If you actually look what I did for the regional assemblies, or in Scotland where I had some responsibility for these things, there we agreed a PR system, because if you did the North East, I had to accept the argument. If we'd have had a regional authority in the North East, there wouldn't have been a Tory on it. And I really can't advocate that you should have one party that's one party control. So I do think it's horses for courses. I'm not absolutely against East change. In fact, I'm elected by AV, but I think in government, producing coalitions is disastrous, as we're now beginning to see.
I just think John's given the answer very elegantly to the Papua New Guinea question. Horses for courses, and we will have a distinctive system for this country.
I mean, in the end, is there not some self-interest here with you, John Prescott, in that the first past the post system is the most likely way to get a majority Labour government?
Well, I would admit that to immediately. I'm a Labour politician. I want to see a Labour government. But in all these proposals and investigations that have gone on, it shows in some cases we win seats, some we lose. The main beneficiary is the Liberal Party. They get more from it. But I'm sure, why shouldn't they say we'd like to have more seats? I mean, we're all politicians. Nobody's going to say don't give us because this is the fairest system.
The loser is
we're
the
party
voter under the
politicians.
present system.
All
The
right.
loser is the voter.
Well,
And this is about the voter,
true.
not
All
about
right,
the political
let's
parties.
move on and now examine the question of which voting system produces better politicians. This is a difficult one. But Charles Kennedy, do you agree with Nick Clegg that during the expenses scandal there was a clear link between how safe an MP's seat was and how likely they were to abuse the system?
Well, speaking as somebody who's got over 50% of the vote,
And a
cast
13,000 majority.
in my own constituency for the last 3 elections, I must choose my words with care in answering this. I don't think that there's necessarily a direct correlation. I think that...
But he said there was. He said there was
Well,
a clear link. That's a shorter language for saying direct correlation.
Well, I'm not sure it is, actually. I think the point that he's made, because I've heard it made by him many times, is that when you've got a system which elects the House of Commons in a certain way, that in itself almost engenders a degree of complacency about the attitude that a lot of people take, because they think we're here for life, and therefore it inevitably in any system injects or infuses just a sense of we're all right, Jack, and we can do things the way that suit us. Now, I think one of the things about AV is we all have to work a bit differently at local level. I absolve my colleagues of parliamentary experience, considerable now in the House of Lords, and Tessa and myself as practising House of Commons members. I think we all have sought at our local level over the years, the decades that we've been in Parliament, to build bridges and to try and represent the broader community. But it doesn't always work
But
like
I
that.
resent Mr Clegg's remark. I'm over 50% and always had 50%. I don't like anybody tell me I'll work harder because they change it. I do work a lot of hours.
50% now, because you're in the unelected part of the
I
constitution.
know, but I have to talk about when I was an elected member, right? And over
So am I,
50%
John.
of the vote. Okay, I'm just saying. But Mr Clegg, when he says there's a connection between them, God blimey, he hasn't got 50% and he was involved in having to pay back expenses. I never paid anything back. I resent that overall generalisation that somehow the expenses has forced the change.
Tessa Jowell, how many constituents have told you that the answer to the expenses scandal was the introduction of the alternative vote?
Nobody. But whenever I knock on doors, whether in my own constituency or around the country in the run-up to the local election campaign, what people say is, when people say they're not going to vote, too often they say, you're all the same and I'm not going to waste my time. So what we have to accept, those of us who are elected, is that there has been a profound breakdown in trust AV is a small change, it's not a cure-all, but it will over time force politicians to behave differently, to reach out beyond just their core vote in their constituency.